There is a reason so many old buildings across Britain have windows that are clearly bricked up, not renovated, not redesigned, sealed shut deliberately because the people living inside could not afford to let light in. That sounds like a strange sentence. Light is free, sunlight costs nothing. But for more than a century and a half, the number of windows in your home determined how much you owed the government. And the consequences of that policy shaped architecture, health, and entire neighborhoods in ways we can still trace on city streets today. Most people today think of windows as a basic feature of any structure. We assume buildings have always had them in abundance, that natural light has always been a design priority. Walk through any modern suburb or apartment complex and you will find broad panes of glass, skylights, sliding doors. Light is treated as a right, a selling point, a measure of quality living. We design homes around it. We pay premiums for south-facing apartments. We speak of natural light the way we speak of clean water, as something fundamental and obvious. But that assumption belongs entirely to the modern era. For much of recorded history, windows were a luxury. Glass was expensive. Openings in walls let in cold as readily as they let in light. A large window was not merely a practical feature, it was a statement of wealth. Even in medieval cathedrals, the interiors could be remarkably dark. At Chartres Cathedral in France, the relative darkness of the interior was noted as a problem, and some windows were eventually replaced with lighter grisaille glass in the 14th century to allow more illumination. If even sacred architecture struggled with the question of light, ordinary houses had far fewer options. The common dwelling had small openings covered with oiled cloth or wooden shutters, and many rooms received no direct sunlight at all. To understand why a government would tax windows, you have to understand the problem that government was trying to solve. In 1696, England under William III needed revenue. The nation was at war with France. The existing hearth tax, which charged households based on the number of fireplaces, had been deeply unpopular because it required tax collectors to enter private homes to count hearths. People resented the intrusion. They resented strangers cataloguing the interior of their dwellings. The hearth tax had generated resistance, evasion, and public anger in roughly equal measure. So Parliament looked for something that could be assessed from the outside, something visible, something that correlated with wealth without requiring inspectors to cross a threshold. Windows were the answer. A house with many windows was almost certainly a house of means. The more glass you displayed to the street, the more prosperous you were assumed to be. It was a proxy for income, readable at a glance from the pavement. The tax was introduced in England and Wales in 1696. It applied to houses with more than 6 windows. The logic was straightforward. Count the openings from the street, calculate the charge, move on. No need to enter, no need to argue over what constituted a hearth. The window was either there or it was not. Simple, visible, external. In theory, it was elegant. In practice, it set off a chain of consequences that no legislator anticipated. What made this policy consequential, and what separates it from a mere footnote in fiscal history, is what happened next. People began to seal their windows, not metaphorically, physically, brick by brick. Homeowners, landlords, and builders started blocking up existing openings to reduce their tax liability. New constructions were designed from the start with fewer windows than comfort or health required. The incentive was clear. Every opening you removed was money kept in your pocket. And so darkness became the economically rational choice. The result was an architectural transformation driven not by aesthetics or engineering, but by avoidance. Rows of terraced houses appeared with blank walls where light should have entered. Tenement buildings in growing industrial cities were constructed with minimal openings. The poorest residents, already crowded into inadequate housing, found themselves in rooms that never saw direct sunlight. Entire corridors of homes turned inward, away from the street, away from the air. Landlords who owned multiple properties had the strongest incentive to reduce windows, because each sealed opening multiplied savings across their holdings. The health consequences accumulated over generations. Dark, poorly ventilated rooms became breeding grounds for disease. Tuberculosis thrived in exactly the conditions the tax incentivized. Reformers and physicians throughout the 18th and 19th centuries pointed to the connection between sealed buildings and illness, between darkness and suffering. The very architecture of poverty was being shaped by fiscal policy, locking the most vulnerable into conditions that shortened their lives. The people who could least afford the tax were the ones most harmed by its avoidance. The phrase daylight robbery is sometimes attributed to public anger over this tax, though the etymology is disputed and the phrase may have emerged later than the policy itself. What is not disputed is the resentment. Critics called it a tax on light, a tax on air, a tax on health. They were not entirely wrong. The policy took something that nature offered freely and made it expensive to receive. The tax did not vanish quickly. It persisted for over 150 years. Various adjustments were made to the thresholds and rates across different periods, but the fundamental mechanism remained. Campaigns for repeal grew louder as industrial urbanization intensified the human cost. More people crowded into cities, more buildings rose with fewer openings. The problem compounded with every decade. It was not until 1851 that the window tax was finally repealed in England, replaced by a house duty that did not penalize natural light. By then, the damage had been built into the very fabric of British cities. The bricked-up windows remain visible today in London, Edinburgh, Bath, and dozens of smaller towns. They are sometimes mistaken for decorative choices or structural necessities. They are neither. They are the scars of a fiscal policy that made darkness cheaper than light. You can run your hand along the mismatched brickwork and feel where someone once made a calculation that comfort was not worth the cost. Scotland had its own version. France implemented a similar tax. The pattern repeated wherever governments sought visible proxies for wealth. And in each case, the population responded not by paying more, but by building darker. The tax assumed people would simply absorb the cost of their existing windows. Instead, they adapted. They chose shadow. Human behavior bent around the policy like water finding the path of least resistance. The modern glass-walled skyscraper, the floor-to-ceiling apartment window, the open-plan home flooded with natural light, these are not neutral design preferences. They exist in a world where no one is charged per pane. The abundance of glass in contemporary architecture is partly a reflection of manufacturing advances, partly a cultural preference, but also partly the absence of a cost that once made every opening a financial decision. We build with glass now because we can, because nothing stops us, because the penalty is gone. We treat sunlight now as something that simply enters buildings. It does not occur to most people that light was once rationed by policy, that governments once created an incentive structure in which the rational economic choice was to live in darkness. We have forgotten that the glass surrounding us is not inevitable. It is the product of a world that stopped punishing people for wanting to see the sky. Next time you pass an old building with bricked-up windows, you are looking at a decision someone made centuries ago. Not an architectural preference, a tax calculation. The light was available. They simply could not afford to let it in.